On January 15, 1967, in front of the largest television audience America had ever assembled, a man lay flat on his back at midfield in the Los Angeles Coliseum. Out cold, not moving. The most feared trash talker in professional football, the man who had spent 2 weeks promising to break the Green Bay Packers in half, was being carried off on a stretcher while 60 million people watched. On the Green Bay sideline, the players were laughing. "The hammer," they shouted, "just got nailed." That should have been the end of the story. A loud man, humbled on the biggest stage in sports. The kind of afternoon that buries a man's name for good. Instead, Fred Williamson stood up, walked away from football, and did something almost nobody in Hollywood had ever dared to do. He looked at an entire industry that killed men who looked like him in the first 5 minutes of every picture, and he wrote 3 rules for himself. He would never be killed on screen. He would win every fight, and he would walk out of every movie with everything he came for. For more than 50 years, he has kept those rules. He built his own studio. He sold his own films to the whole world. He answered to no one but himself. And today, at 88 years old, Fred "the Hammer" Williamson is still standing, still working, still refusing to lower his head to anyone. This is the story of a man who got knocked out in front of the world one Sunday afternoon, and then spent the next half-century making certain that no one would ever knock him down again. Number 1. The Boy from the Steel City. Fred Williamson was born on March 5, 1938, in Gary, Indiana. If you want to understand the man, you first have to understand the town. Gary was not a natural place. It was constructed out of the sand dunes on the shore of Lake Michigan in 1906 by the United States Steel Corporation, named after the chairman who built it, and filled with families who had come north looking for mill work. It was smoke and iron and cold water and hard men, and it did not hand anything to a black kid on the south side. Williamson has never once been ashamed of where he came from. He says it with his chin up. "I'm a ghetto boy," he told an interviewer. "I'm a real thug from the south side of Chicago. I used to wear a chain for a belt." His father was a welder. The household ran on discipline and muscle and the simple understanding that nobody was coming to rescue you. But here is the first thing the world got wrong about Fred Williamson, and it would keep getting it wrong for the next 60 years. They looked at the size and the swagger and the chain for a belt, and they assumed that was all there was. They had no idea what was coming. By the time he graduated from Gary's Froebel High School in 1956, he was an all-state shot putter with a body built like a monument and a mind nobody had bothered to measure. So what does a so-called thug from the Steel City do when the whole world has already decided exactly how small his life is going to be? Number 2. The scholar nobody saw coming. He goes to Northwestern University, not a football factory, one of the most demanding academic institutions in the country, and he does not go there to coast. Fred Williamson, enrolled at Northwestern on an athletic scholarship, played under the legendary coach Ara Parsegian, and in 1960, he walked out with a degree in architectural engineering. Read that again. The man Hollywood would later try to cast as muscle, as the heavy, as the disposable tough guy, was a trained engineer. He designed structures. He understood load and stress and mathematics. And he was proud of the contradiction he represented. "Take this thug out of Chicago," he said, "and put him in Northwestern University, one of the highest intellectual schools in the country. I graduated as an architectural engineer with brains who also was an extraordinary athlete." And he did not just frame the degree on a wall, he used it. In the off-seasons, when he wasn't playing football, Williamson worked as a real architectural engineer, drawing plans at a drafting table, living what he called 6 months as a football player and 6 months as an architect. But there was a problem waiting inside that respectable career: the desk, the 9 to 5. The quiet, orderly, safe life that everyone told him he should be grateful to have. Fred Williamson sat at that drafting table, looked at the rest of his life, and felt something close to suffocation. So what happens when a man built for the arena is handed a comfortable cage instead? Number 3. The hammer is born. He goes back to the arena, and he becomes the loudest man in it. Fred Williamson signed into professional football. and almost immediately he became something the sport had rarely seen before. Not just a great defensive back, a showman, a self-made legend who understood, decades before anyone else, that attention itself was a form of power. The nickname came from the way he played. He delivered brutal karate-style forearm blows to the heads of receivers, blows that knocked men clean out of games. Opponents started calling him the Hammer, and Williamson did what a lesser man never would have. He leaned all the way into it. He turned it into a brand. He starred for the Oakland Raiders and made the All-Star team 3 straight years. He wore custom-tailored uniforms and flashy white shoes when everyone else looked identical. He talked to reporters when no one else would, and his reasoning was pure, cold marketing genius. If 20,000 people cheered me and 20,000 booed me, he said, that meant 40,000 people were looking at me. That's all I wanted. He had figured out the secret of his entire future life before he ever set foot on a movie set. Being liked was optional. Being seen was everything. He built a persona so large it could not be ignored, and he built it on purpose. But a man who talks that loud is making a promise to the whole world, and sooner or later, the world is going to demand that he back it up. So what happens when the biggest mouth in football walks into the biggest game ever played? Number 4, the day the Hammer got nailed. It happens exactly the way we started. January 1967. The first ever championship between the champions of the 2 rival leagues, the game that would one day be called Super Bowl I. And Fred Williamson, now with the Kansas City Chiefs, does what Fred Williamson does. He creates the entire storyline himself. 2 hammers to Dowler, 1 to Dale should be enough, he promises, naming the Packers receivers he plans to destroy. The press followed him everywhere, because nobody else would give them a show. I created my own hype, he later admitted. He was, single-handedly, the reason America was talking about that game. And then the game was played. In the 4th quarter, with Green Bay already pulling away, Williamson closed in to make a tackle and drove his head straight into the knee of Packers running back Donnie Anderson. The Hammer dropped like a stone. Knocked unconscious, carried off the field on a stretcher in front of the whole country as the Packers hollered that the Hammer had finally been nailed. Here is where a different man breaks. Here is where the humiliation follows you the rest of your life, the punchline you can never outrun. But watch what Fred Williamson actually did with it. He wore his loss like he wore everything else, with total confidence. He still wears his Super Bowl ring to this day. He never once pretended it didn't happen, and he never once let it shrink him. He simply decided the story wasn't over. So if football had given him the world's attention and then dropped him flat, where does a man like that go to make sure it never happens again? Number 5. I'm better looking than any of those guys. He goes to Hollywood. And the way he decided to go is the most Fred Williamson thing you will ever hear. After football, he was back at that drafting desk, restless, watching television one night. On the screen was the hit show Julia, starring Diahann Carroll as the first black woman to headline an American sitcom in a dignified leading role. And every week, a different handsome man played her boyfriend. Williamson looked at those men and had exactly one thought. I'm better looking than any of those guys, he said. I'm going to Hollywood. That was the entire business plan. No agent, no connections, no acting classes. Just a man who had already convinced 20,000 strangers to boo him, betting he could convince a camera to love him. He talked his way onto the 20th Century Fox lot, charmed the producers, and landed a recurring role as Julia's love interest. Then came the role that announced him for real. In 1970, the director Robert Altman cast him in M.A.S.H., one of the biggest and most acclaimed films of the entire era, a picture that won the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Williamson played the football star turned surgeon who wins the movie's big game. He had crossed over. From the Steel City, to the engineering degree, to the football field, to the silver screen, on nothing but nerve and a face he trusted. But Hollywood in the early 1970s had a very specific, very small idea of what a man like Fred Williamson was allowed to be. And that is the exact moment he decided to blow the whole thing up. So what did Hollywood try to make him, and why did he refuse? Number 6. A hero when there were none. Hollywood wanted him to die. Literally. The roles being offered to black actors in that era were, in his words, roles that did not fit his image or his character. The black man in the picture existed to be menacing for a reel and then get gunned down so the white star could avenge him. Fred Williamson took one look at that arrangement and walked the other way. At that time, black people needed heroes, he said. We didn't have any heroes. All we had was Sidney Poitier. And Sidney is a great actor, but he didn't represent anything to me on a physical side. So I took it upon myself to be that kind of guy. He decided that if he was going to do this, it would be on his terms, and he would be the hero. And the audiences came roaring. Between 1972 and 1976, he became one of the defining action stars of the decade. Hammer, Black Caesar, his signature role as a Harlem kingpin, a genuine box office smash. Hell Up in Harlem, That Man Bolt, marketed as a black James Bond. 3 The Hard Way, the legendary team-up with fellow icons Jim Brown and Jim Kelly. He gave a generation of moviegoers something they had almost never been given before. A man on screen who looked like them, feared no one, and never lost. He refused even to accept the label critics slapped on those films. I don't know who was being exploited, he said. The fans were seeing something they hadn't seen before. The actors were making more money than they ever made. But being the hero on screen was only half the battle. The other half was about who controlled the man behind the hero. So how do you make sure Hollywood can never take your dignity away? You put it in writing. Number 7. The 3 rules. This is the heart of the whole story. Fred Williamson sat down and created a personal code. 3 unbreakable rules that governed every role he would ever accept. Say them out loud, because he did. For 50 years. You can't kill me in the movie. I want to win all my fights in the movie. And I get the girl at the end of the movie if I want her. It sounds like ego. It was something far deeper than that. It was a refusal to be diminished, written into a contract. He understood exactly what the industry wanted from him, and he named it without flinching. They want to kill the black guy in the first 5 minutes of the film, he said, and have Arnold Schwarzenegger avenge his death. That's not what I got into the business for. Kill Schwarzenegger and let me avenge his death. He was even shrewd about how he enforced it. He would demand all 3 rules, knowing producers would balk at the third, the girl, so he'd generously offer them an out. You've got to do 2 out of the 3. He always got the 2 that mattered. He was never killed, he never lost. Think about what that really means. Every single time Fred Williamson walked onto a screen, a black man in an America that had spent centuries trying to make black men small, walked out of that story standing, victorious, and whole. That was not vanity. That was dignity, enforced one contract at a time. But a hired actor can only enforce so much. To truly control his image and his money, he would have to own the whole operation himself. So how far was Fred Williamson willing to go to be his own boss? Number 8. A telephone, a calculator, and a dog named Hammer. In 1974, Fred Williamson founded his own production company. He called it Po' Boy Productions. And through it, he did the thing that almost no actor of his moment, of any color, had the nerve to do. He wrote his own films. He produced them. He directed them. He starred in them. And critically, he sold them himself and kept the money. He saw the collapse coming before the studios did. When the boom in black cinema faded in the mid-1970s, Williamson understood the ugly economics underneath it. The studios, he said, didn't think it was socially fashionable to brag at their Bel Air parties about which black film had made them rich. So, they let those films get sold off cheap. Williamson's answer was to cut out the middleman entirely and carry his own pictures to the Cannes Film Festival, selling them country by country. $100,000 for Italy, $125,000 for France. And he described his empire with a grin that told you everything about the man. Po' Boy Productions, he said, is a telephone, a calculator, a typewriter, and a dog named Hammer. I don't even have an agent. He claimed to have made dozens of films, and that not a single one of them ever lost money. This was the lesson he preached to every young black filmmaker who would listen, decades before it became fashionable to say it. Don't go to Hollywood asking for a job. Learn to finance your own films. Own the thing outright. Now I'm in total control, he said, and I know damn well I'm not dying in my own movie. He had turned his 3 rules into an entire business, but the American market had turned its back on him. So where does a man go when the country that watched him get up off that stretcher decides it's done with him? Number 9. The world was bigger than Hollywood. He takes his talent somewhere that still wants it. When the American appetite for his films dried up, Fred Williamson did not sit in Los Angeles waiting for the phone to ring. He got on a plane. He moved his operation to Rome and became a star all over again in European genre cinema, making crime films and war pictures across the 1970s and 80s. His standout, The Inglorious Bastards, from 1978, became such a cult favorite that Quentin Tarantino borrowed its title for his own film decades later. Williamson never saw it as exile. He saw it as freedom. When the so-called Blaxploitation movies came to an end in the United States, he said flatly, "I went to the European market. I've been there ever since." He learned to speak Italian. He kept working. He kept winning. On continents most American actors never bothered to conquer. And then America remembered. In 1996, a new generation rediscovered him all at once. Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino put him in From Dusk Till Dawn, alongside George Clooney. And that same year came the film that said everything about who Fred Williamson was. He conceived and produced original gangstas, and he brought the legends home, reuniting Jim Brown, Pam Grier, Richard Roundtree, and Ron O'Neal as aging heroes cleaning up a crime-ravaged city. The city they filmed in was Gary, Indiana, his hometown. He had come full circle, back to the steel dunes where a ghetto boy once wore a chain for a belt, and this time he owned the whole picture. He had outlasted the trend, outlasted the doubters, outlasted the very idea that Hollywood got to decide when he was finished. So after all of it, the field, the fame, the studio, the exile, and the return, what does a man like Fred Williamson leave behind? Number 10. Before the Black Panther, there was Fred Williamson. He leaves behind a bloodline. Fred Williamson is still with us today, 88 years old, and he has never once softened the message. In 2024, the Gary International Black Film Festival gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award, and the Screen Actors Guild Foundation held a 90-minute retrospective of his career. The industry that once wanted to kill him in the first 5 minutes now stands and applauds when he enters the room. And Williamson knows exactly what he built, and who he built it for. "I don't care about Hollywood," he says, with the same confidence he had at that Super Bowl podium. Before the Black Panther, there was Fred Williamson. He is not wrong. You can draw a straight line from his 3 rules to Denzel Washington, to Wesley Snipes, to Will Smith, to Samuel L. Jackson, to every black leading man who now walks through a movie unbroken and undefeated. He kicked that door down when there was no door, and he did it on his own dime. He produced more than 70 films. He directed more than 70. He designed buildings, he starred in the first Super Bowl, and he never, not once, let another man tell him who he was allowed to be. "It's not about Hollywood and what it's done for me," he says. "I don't care about Hollywood." Now go back to that afternoon in 1967. A man flat on his back at midfield, carried off on a stretcher, the whole world laughing that the hammer had finally been nailed. That was the moment everyone thought his story ended. It was actually the moment it began. Because Fred Williamson got up off that stretcher and spent the next 57 years proving that you can knock a proud man down exactly once, and if he's built right, he will spend the rest of his life making certain the world never gets to do it again. He wrote 3 rules so no one could ever diminish him. He kept every one of them, and he is still standing. If this story of a man who refused to bow moved you the way it moved us, do one thing for him. Subscribe to the channel and leave his name in the comments below so the algorithm carries the story of Fred the Hammer Williamson to every person who still believes a man should get to walk out of his own life standing tall.